Hey everyone, it's been a minute since I've done a video of the coronavirus diaries of late. The last video I did, and the last four actually, were all in regard to things such as the coronavirus itself, the epidemic, people having coronavirus, um, what state and local governments are doing about it, and the situation of coronavirus. Well, right now, the reason I've taken a break is because I feel like I've beaten that issue to death. Coronavirus rates are going down, and hopefully, and there is definitely going to be a third stimulus package. We're going to have to see what's going to happen. Hopefully, they bolster unemployment benefits because that is something that the Democrats are going to want, and the Republicans are facing a very tough election coming up in November. So, just wanted to talk briefly on that. Another thing I wanted to discuss today specifically is what's going on with George Floyd, and now we're on 13 days of not only nationwide but international protests that are happening. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about this issue is because of the fact that, first and foremost, one thing. These issues have been going on now for close to 6 decades, and that's really heartening and somber to think about. Since the civil rights era. First of all, modern policing in the United States came from the culture of slavery and slave catching. That's how we have our institution of policing has started, and that's how the ideology and the psyche behind policing still goes to this day. So, for example, from the whole period after the post-Civil War, all the way through the Civil Rights era, and the Watts riots and the Martin Luther King assassination riots, one thing that's been a pervasive thing that's happened, and it was very overt at that time, was that the cops were created as an institution to protect white people from black people. That's what the ideology was. If you remember Birth of a Nation was created on this irrational, illegitimate fear that black people were out to harm white women and it's up to white men to protect their women, and therefore we need the Klan, and a lot of Klansmen became police officers. So that's the culture of American policing in a nutshell. Now, since the Civil Rights era, police brutality has still continued in the form of the war on drugs. Now, some of you already know this, but if someone is black, they're 10.1 times more likely to be arrested and incarcerated, and by the way, at a higher with longer sentencing than someone who's white if they're caught for the same level of drug crime. Now, the thing we have to ask ourselves is, what if there wasn't video evidence during the murder of George Floyd? This man was pinned down to concrete on one end and had Officer Derek Chauvin knee him, an officer, by the way, who had 18 complaints against him throughout his career, who Amy Klobuchar, when she was a prosecutor, had the opportunity to prosecute, but failed to do so in Minnesota. And and there goes her vice presidential chances, by the way. But this man had his knee pinned down to George Floyd's head, on his neck, and on the other side was hard, hot cement and concrete. He did that for a good 9 minutes almost. 8 minutes and 38 seconds to be exact. And that's a theme in all of the protests as well. Everyone's kneeling for exactly 8 minutes and 38 seconds in memory of George Floyd in all of these protests. Now, the reason the protests have gotten rampant and worldwide is because of everything I talked about up till this point. This has been a pervasive issue in the United States for close to 200 years, from slave catching to the police brutality that happened during the Jim Crow era, to the police brutality that happened during the war on drugs, all the way up till today, the police brutality that continues to happen. It's not like, if this were a one-off incident, the protest wouldn't have been this staggering and it wouldn't have gone on for this long. Now, one thing that I'm really hopeful about seeing is the city of Minneapolis is defunding their police department altogether, which means that, well, for now we'll see what that happens. This was just a recent emergency city council meeting decision, but the city of Minneapolis, like most major cities in the United States, most major blue democratic cities, has had all kinds of complaints, hordes of complaints with racist violence and general police brutality in the police force. So hopefully, my hope is the LAPD, the Anaheim PD, all the police forces we have out here in Southern California take note and also do something in regard to the racial incidents we have with police here. At the end of the day, I want you guys to do your homework. All of my videos encourage you all to do your research outside of what you do, what you hear from me. But there's all kinds of programs out there. For example, community policing. There's that, and then there's also what's known as what's it called? Restorative justice. So there's community policing. There's restorative justice. All these techniques that don't necessarily require a brute militaristic police force like we've been having in the United States. So it is essentially what community policing is. Like, let's say a young person in a community. It also requires, by the way, communities to be more tight-knit. Let's say a young person in a community is at the risk of becoming a violent offender or a drug dealer, let's say. What would happen is if it was a young man, for example, a lot of the elder men in the community would be informed that, hey, this kid is up to no good. He's been a delinquent in school. He's selling drugs on the side. He's has a history of violence. And then what would happen is the elder men in that community would grab the young man, sit him down, and have basically an intervention. Tell him what the consequences are of the action he's taking, show him what happens when people take these consequences, and maybe even give real-life examples. If there is a member in the community who's gone down that track, how it's hurt him, and really intervene. And every time something like that happens, just really get in, intervene, and have the community come up with a set of consequences for bad actions. That won't require brute force, that doesn't require militarism, that doesn't require police. And that's just one method. Restorative justice puts the victim in front of the assailant of a crime, and the victim kind of describes in graphic detail what happened to them, how they felt, makes the victim assailant essentially sympathize and empathize with how they hurt someone, and that's actually been proven to be a good method as well. Now, in regard to these protests, and especially the behavior of President Trump, one thing that I'm inspired to see is that we've seen the more militaristic side of Donald Trump that we saw at the Republican National Convention in 2016. His demand for, quote, law and order. He wants to send the military in, he said, to stop looters, but essentially we found out it wasn't just looters he wants to stop with the military. He also wants to bring in the military to ward off and fight peaceful protesters, whom we refer to as terrorists in the letter. He's been hearkening back to a lot of racist politicians in the United States, like Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan, and also Walter Headley, the Miami police chief. But yeah, I just wanted to rant on that. I'm running low on time. I try to keep all these videos under 10 minutes. I think what's going to happen is this is going to be a good thing for the Democratic Party. We're going to hopefully sweep even more in November because of Trump's recent actions. But at the end of the day, our police system in the United States needs dramatic reform. And I'm looking forward to racial justice and police reform being a huge priority in the Democratic Party. So it was good catching up with you guys. Tell me if you enjoyed this, and please post your comments about racial justice and criminal justice reform.